Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of On Blogging or On Writing here on Reclaim TV. And with me today is a very special guest. Hello, Bonnie. Welcome.
Hello, Marin. I'm Bonnie Stewart, everybody. Nice to be here. Absolute privilege.
Well, we are so thrilled that you could make time and fit us in. And I am also thrilled that Jim is still traveling. We're recording this in the depth of the summer break. And so I have the privilege to talk with you today. And in a minute, we're going to jump into what is going to be a great conversation. But first, I want to give a heads up that if you're watching this on or before the 20th of August, then you have an opportunity to, hear a little bit about what's in store for that date, because Bonnie has agreed to join us in our blogging community of practice, aka Bloggers Anonymous, for a community of practice session. Now, we don't record those sessions because we want them to be an open conversation and everybody gets to have their say. So I thought, Bonnie, we might start today talking a little bit about what might be in store for that session. And if anybody's listening who wants to join us, the session is free to attend and open to all. So I'll include the link with the recording.
Absolutely open. I make no promises other than that. I'm hoping to talk a little bit about, in a sense, the idea of reclaim has always appealed to me because I was lucky enough to come into digital networks at a time when there was a lot of really participatory, genuine human connection happening. And those networks are really what led to me being here today in the fullness of time. But even as those networks themselves have been enclosed in sadness, Twitter, as things have shifted, nonetheless, I think there are things to reclaim from participatory engagement. And so part of what I wanted to talk about in a couple of weeks, just under 2 weeks, on the 20th of August, is about how I think there are still some paths to building participatory voice and kind of putting your own things out there in the world, finding ways to let your freak flag fly if you have a freak flag, or if you're thinking about a freak flag, or if you're just like, look, the world is mad, I might as well get a freak flag. Finding your people, and even kind of getting back up on that horse again when you haven't done it in a long time. So that's something that I did this past year. I had the privilege of doing a sabbatical project. And after having not blogged in 5 years, I opened a new blog and did kind of force myself to get back up there and give it a shot again. And I really enjoyed the process. I also struggled deeply with the process. But that's the journey that I'm going to share, is maybe why it was worth it and also why it was hard.
Wow. Well, I'm definitely going to be there. I can't wait to explore more with you. But I'm curious, just in terms of the sabbatical, you mentioned that you had the opportunity to take some time away from the very busy day job and do a little bit of exploring. So I saw on social media that you were traveling. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what the project was about, and where you went to do it?
Absolutely. So I had the incredible privilege. I was late coming to what in North America we call a tenured faculty position. And I was in my mid-40s before I ever had a pension. I was very excited to get a pension. And I never really even had kind of thought about, oh my God, if I actually teach in my 7th year, I get a sabbatical. Because I had been teaching sessionally and casually for 20 years before I took this position. And then in the summer of 2023, I sat down and I went, oh, I guess I have to propose a sabbatical project. And being the good little Lisa Simpson that I am, I immediately thought that I had to do more of a project than necessarily I actually did have to do. But that is a lifelong struggle for me. But it was also the summer of 2023, and I teach digital technologies. My role is associate professor of online pedagogy and workplace learning. I do much more of the online pedagogy piece of that, mostly just based on how my institution is structured. And in the summer of 2023, everyone and their pet cat was hanging out a shingle on LinkedIn saying, I'm an AI expert. I do a lot of critical work on AI. I also do some usage work on AI, but the idea of doing my sabbatical research on AI made me want to go jump in the river. So I decided to look as far from that concept of automation and hype as I could. And I decided that I wanted to look at belonging in this fractured, polarized era. And I had been at the OER conference in 2023 in the spring in Inverness in Scotland. And I had loved the built environment of that campus. I had loved the experience of being in the Highland. I mean, my name is Bonnie Stewart, right? I caveat. Our tastes, we're all raised to certain things. And so I cold called Keith Smythe at the University of Highlands and Islands. And I was like, hey, you met me briefly a couple of months ago. Is there any chance that I could come and look at UHI as an exemplar for digital education that is place-based, that has a mandate for belonging in a human individual sense and in a cultural and place-based sense? And bless him, I don't know if he regrets it yet, but he said yes. And so a year later, got to spend sort of a month last fall from mid-September to mid-October, and then about 3 weeks this June in Scotland, traveling around to a variety of sites and campuses, and also just places that I had always wanted to go in the Highlands and particularly the islands of Scotland, talking to staff at UHI about their digital practices, their place-based practices, and their belonging practices. And it was too much. I did a report for the institution, I've written some academic papers, did an open resource annotated bibliography. So a variety of outputs from this, but I particularly just wanted to blog because of the personal connection piece. I grew up in Prince Edward Island on the east coast of Canada, and it was one of the, I think, the most Scottish places in the world outside of Scotland when I was growing up. It has become significantly more diverse since, but when Canada confederated in the late 1800s, and I guess in the Canadian, for Americans, the term confederation means a very, very different thing. When Canada became a bunch of colonies that joined together as a country in the late 1800s, the smallest East Coast colonies, Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, which had been centers of a fair amount of industry and immigration and settlement, kind of became the equivalent of flyover states, in the sense that there was really almost no further immigration for close to 100 years. So I grew up in a world that had been quite frozen in time, and where you largely knew by someone's last name. When I was growing up, it was whether they were Scottish, Irish, French, English, Lebanese, or Mi'kmaq. That was, other than the few kids whose parents were professors at the university, that was the background of everyone that I knew growing up. And the vast majority of those people were Scottish or Irish. And so it was a very Celtically influence shaped culture. And to get to travel around Scotland and talk to people was kind of uncanny, in the sense that I felt very at home. I didn't feel terribly at risk of putting my foot in my mouth and saying the wrong thing, which is unusual for me. I understood the cultural codes, and it was kind of very clear where a lot of that had come from. And this spring, when I did go back, the first place that I went this spring was actually a tiny Hebridean island off the west coast, where my mother's people came from, because most of the population of that island, and many were removed. My people would have been serfs, essentially, landless folks who belonged to the kind of last remnants of the clan system. The chiefs became lairds and lords, and they were more performing for their English lord fancy cousins, and didn't need all of these people anymore. And it was kind of an early capitalist destruction of an entire system. And so I went to the Isle of Coll. I was the first person in my line who would have set foot on that island in about 180 years, because the last of my ancestors would have left in what we think of here, at least, as the Irish famine, but it affected the Hebrides as well. And I went to the graveyard, and all of the names in the graveyard, McKinnons, McPhails, McNevins, who were my mother's people, were the names that I grew up with on Prince Edward Island. And I realized that they had basically cleared that entire island to Prince Edward Island, almost wholesale. And it was very powerful to go on that journey. And I wanted to write about and reflect on and record a little bit of that journey. And blogging for me has always been the way that I do some of my, I guess, deepest thinking about those things. I don't feel like academic writing offers me, at least, the space for that. So that was my.
Wow, I love seeing the pictures that you shared, and I love hearing that story just now of you setting foot, the first in a long time. And I wonder, like, how did you go about collecting your impressions? Did you take lots of photographs? Did you do like drawings? Did you do like, how did you like take your memories with you?
I took, all through the traveling, I took a ton of photographs, because I take a ton of photographs. Most of the photographs live on my phone and wither and die there. But I did want to include sort of a visual record in the posts that I did. I didn't end up posting all that much. I posted a few posts while I was traveling in the fall, a couple of posts while I was there in the spring. I was surprisingly busy. And so, to an extent, the headspace for the deep reflection, there was only so much of it. And it was kind of attention to try to actually clear the capacity to do that piece of work. Because that sort of deep reflection in writing is work as well, as much as it is also something that brings me deep joy. And this is also the Lisa Simpson in my head, but I need it to be good if I'm going to publish it. And so I put a fair amount of pressure on myself, which sometimes can be absolutely paralyzing. So there were ideas that got started that didn't get posted, either for time or because I couldn't figure out where I wanted to go with them. I do wish I had brought a paper journal. I used to be, before I was a blogger, I was a paper journaler, and I had sketchbooks that I occasionally sketched in, but I had largely lost. I was a kid who drew, but I largely lost my drawing practice, other than like little cartoons. But I hand wrote. I would sit. I didn't travel until I was about 30, and then I lived abroad for 5 years, and in that window, I would sit in coffee shops and pubs and write. And it was partly a protective mechanism, because when you travel alone as a female embodied person, particularly when I was younger, I did need something to appear busy. So I wasn't sort of sitting there as like an open invitation. The way that people use their phone now, right, to appear like they're doing something, but mostly it was just a way of recording. And that personal level, I I wish I had thought before I left to get myself a sketchbook, but I did not. So most of my recording was photos. When I went to call, particularly because there was a part of me that was deeply, deeply moved by being there and by having had the absolute privilege of getting to go back and thinking about who were these people who lived in like this was early June and the climate was not welcoming. And I saw the little stone houses that, you know, these people who were my ancestors only, like we're only talking 5 generations back, would have lived in. And sort of trying to imagine them. So I took a lot of selfies on that trip, which I don't always do, but I was somehow trying to capture in my own face the way that I felt. And I almost couldn't fix my face to quite get it right because there was like this profound sorrow. And also, I think it was just mostly the bearing witness.
Mm-hmm.
And also they're like, look at this place. This is amazing. I'm here. Like, so trying to get all those things in your own face at the right time while also getting an angle that doesn't make you look kind of like the Highland coup behind you. Cause my hair would be blowing in this wind, right? It was, I looked like Donald Trump. It was great.
I really love this metaphor, or well, practice and metaphor of sketchbook and blog. I've often used that metaphor to compare how I use my blog because it's been very much that sort of experimental space and just like leaving notes. And, you know, I think sometimes I'm a bit more casual about what I share on the blog maybe than I should be because it is a public space and I am very aware of that. So I also have paper journals. I think 3 within reach at the moment. So I'm never far away from one. So I really empathize with that. But tell us a little bit more about this process of trying to translate your experience and the research into, you know, something that you published. You said that that process wasn't always easy. So can you give us a little bit of a flavor of that process?
For sure. Also, I need to get sketchbooks. I think that you have just inadvertently convinced me, and so even though that journey is over, I'm gonna make that investment and try to make some time for that because I missed that. And I guess the thing that was really interesting about the sabbatical project for me was that I was trying to be a person who is doing this very personal journey and also a professional who's doing a very professional thing that is public and about a university that has entrusted me, you know, to invited me in and welcomed me at a time when all higher ed institutions are going through a lot. And so it was a joint responsibility, in a sense, a responsibility to 2 very different kinds of things. And that piece was tough for me to navigate, particularly through the winter. I did write some blog posts and I had intended to sort of write reflective blog posts about the findings. And I did. But I found that putting the findings out in the blog posts felt very mechanical and instrumental to me. And I was never an instrumental blogger. And so I needed to find a lens on each of the findings where I really could kind of reflect on something. And I still have a bunch of half-written drafts because I would start down a road and I'd be like, doop, doop, doop. I don't know where that's going. Or tuk, tuk, tuk. Okay, this is not my institution. We're not going to go there. Or just like it was a very interesting navigation of responsibility to my own voice and responsibility to an institution who had treated me very kindly. And what I was doing was a strengths-based case study of the institution. And I found a ton of strengths, but it's always interesting to, even when you're only talking about strengths, to figure out how do I find a way into actually writing about this in a way that doesn't just sound like I, churned it out on an LLM type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that balance was the balance. And I really loved the getting my hands dirty at that sort of, I guess, that coal face of thinking and writing that makes writing really powerful for me, and also makes writing a difficult chore, and also is the reason why so many people are eager to turn it over to LLMs, and also the reason why I hope we don't completely.
Audrey Waters was on this a while ago, and one of the things Audrey often talks about is the fact that she doesn't know what she's going to write before she writes it, right? It's just a discovery approach to writing. And I feel very similar. I hardly ever write anything and knowing beforehand where it's going to go. Often I have a theme or an idea, but I don't quite know until I've finished. And so
That's what I love about it.
Yeah, right. That's the only reason why I do it. And if I knew what I knew by the end of it beforehand, then I wouldn't have to be doing it. That's the whole point for me. So I can't imagine outsourcing it, because I can't, I wouldn't learn anything from it. So I really empathize with what you just mentioned. But as you say, there's also a lot of different nuances at play. You're writing about an institution. You are in a professional capacity. We live in interesting times, in very uncertain times. And, many people, particularly in our blogging community of practice, are struggling with finding their voice or having anything to say, and trying to not just feel like they're screaming into the void. And I guess I'm curious, you said at the beginning that you hadn't been blogging for a while before you did this project. So can you reflect a little bit on that, sort of restarting that process and finding a voice to articulate parts of that journey?
For sure. I had stopped, basically the start of the pandemic was kind of the last straw for me. I actually did churn out one post in June of 2020 that I was really happy with, because everything had gone online and I had spent a lot of time teaching online over the years. And it was kind of like, just here are some things that I've learned type of post. But that window of closing everything down in ways that had been like truly unthinkable to me, and holding up in my home with two adolescents, there were parts of it that I loved and parts of it that were really hard. And I think that just at the weight of it on my own psyche made it impossible to go inside enough to gain enough distance from myself. There was no coffee shop that I could go and sit at to gain. And I've actually done most of my blogging over the almost 20 years since I started in my own home, but usually not while there are other people sitting right there. When my kids were very small, I used to blog when they were asleep, which was only sometimes. But yeah, I think that the pandemic kind of put a nail in the coffin of my education blog for me, but it had already been dwindling. And I think it was actually my PhD, which I had finished 5 years earlier, that had really made that process of that form of thinking challenging for me, partly because the process had been challenging in its own ways, had delegitimized some of that process for me. I'm not by nature an academic writer. It was kind of a very awkward second language for me that I had to learn. I'm not sure that I learned it especially well, but I was trying to ape it. And in doing so, I lost some of the confidence that I had built over years of blogging. And it just kind of started to fade at the same time that we were really starting to see ed tech in general be enclosed, networks be enclosed, the what had started as monetization became kind of clear corporatization, weaponization, misinformation, disinformation, and it became a much more toxic sphere. And this was visible 10 years ago. And all of those things, I guess, just kind of slowly had killed some of my joy in it, but also just my capacity to go there in myself. I started as a blogger completely by accident. I started as a blogger who didn't read blogs. I started because my partner was like, hey, like he had a blog, he had a webcast in 2005. And at one point, at a very strange time in my life, between two kind of almost unthinkable windows in my life, there was a calm point. He was like, have you thought about starting a blog? And I was like, I used to like to write. Maybe I will. And I had spent time sending like mass emails out to people. And I was like, well, rather than like, again, early newslettering, but rather than these landing in their inbox and them feeling like they have to write it, what if I just give them this link and they can come if they want? And it was very much about sort of my own internal world and self at that time. It was positioned between the loss of a child and the birth of the next, and the becoming a parent to a child who's very much wanted and also didn't sleep, but mostly really just the me pieces of that. And I didn't know that anybody who didn't know me would ever find it and read it, but they did, and they showed up and they commented, and it was like catnip. And I found them, and they were thoughtful writers who were caring and deeply grappling with things that I related to. And there was this beautiful window of participatory engagement that I had no idea was out there, and which absolutely enabled, scaffolded, received, lifted me up to a voice that I had always kind of believed that I had in me, but had never fully taken the risk to find out. And it was a space that I will be like forever, forever grateful. It existed. And then I sort of slowly have watched it, and it was all based on the free and open capacity of digital media. And I have watched it all be turned into an absolute flaming trash fire. I saw this little meme, I guess, not that long ago. You know, the little cute cartoon of the dumpster on fire? You've seen it one?
Yeah.
It was that cute little cartoon of the dumpster on fire with this little light of mine. I'm going to let it shine. Which is kind of how I feel about my own blogging and voice at this point, right?
Yeah.
Here we are.
It's interesting how many times, I guess that's why we set up this community. That's why Jim started having these on writing conversations, because I think there's a whole, generation of voices who all have, a version of this journey, and trying to find a way into what the next chapter looks like, if there is one, or maybe there isn't. But, when we had like Kate Bowles talk about her, I think she blogged once in 2023, and then, and I think she stopped around that sort of summer of 2020. So this is an interesting place, I think, to meet, at the end of all things, if you like, when it comes to blogging.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you a frivolous question, as well. Because I saw when you and I had the privilege of meeting in Dublin earlier this year, and you did a gasta. And for the uninitiated amongst you, a gasta is an Irish invention championed by Tom Farrelly. It's 5 minutes of madness on an academic stage.
It's great fun.
It is great fun, and it is a fun way of giving conference presentations. And you were brave enough to step into the ring, if you like, and channel Bowie, your muse and inspiration in this Gasta moment. And so that made me think, when I was preparing for this, what about Bowie and blogging? Is there a story? That was there any blogging? Could there be blogging? Is there like an alter ego that could be resurrected? Because I think a little bit of that weird and wonderfulness could be good in the blogosphere. So just to round us off, I'm going to pose that to you.
Fabulous. I think 100% for me, at least, the person that I found, the person that I had always thought was in there, because of David Bowie. I discovered David Bowie, like particularly 70s David Bowie, in the 80s when I was about 8th grade, 12 or 13. He was peculiar and uncanny and different from anybody else that I had ever seen in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island. And there I was thinking that I was the, only awkward, weird, peculiar, the only person in the world who didn't quite know what to make of gender and sexuality, but thought it should be much more interesting than it seemed to be. And so for me, David Bowie and art generally was always about finding the capacity for self-expression, and finding the self-expression that fit for you. And I initially, because it was the 80s and things were the way that they were, I thought that I had this massive crush on David Bowie, right? Even though he was 25 years older than me. That wasn't a problem there. But because I was embodied in what most people would have assumed was a female body, and he was more or less a male, then that had to be a crush. It took me until I was in my late 20s to realize, no, nay, I wanted to be David Bowie. And I think that probably the closest that I ever actually came was in finding my own blogging voice. I was a mommy blogger, like the least David Bowie thing in the world. But I got to be my own weird, peculiar, thinking, caring self in the world. And I was always really, really grateful that just that he had existed and put that out there. Yeah.
I love that. And I really hear you. I went down a little trip on memory lane recently, because when I started blogging, I was an undergrad, and then my first proper blog was all about cemeteries, because that was my PhD subject.
Right.
And I still have a cemeteries focused blog with really, really serious posts around different types of coffins that were painted. And I went to these weird exhibitions, and it's it's so earnest, it's very studenty. Yeah. It's me trying on that academic voice. Yeah. But I really relate to that, being able to be yourself on your blog, and, having that sort of space. It's so precious. So
that's what the long tail of the internet gave us, right? Is like everybody who's interested in their own little weird things. There might be nobody in your town who is as excited by that as you are, but it's a chance to find those people. And I was really grateful to that era of the participatory web, because when Bowie died in 2016, I was absolutely gutted, absolutely gutted. And hundreds of people reached out to me as if I had suffered a personal loss. And I felt vaguely ridiculous, but I was also so I have done something in the world that is what I want to do in the world. There you go. I managed to put out there that this is my vibe.
I I can't believe that. What did they reach out to you with condolences, like
Yeah.
feeling for your loss?
Yeah. Like my Facebook, I went to work that morning and I cried at work, which I don't think I'd cried at work in 20 years. But I was truly, genuinely gutted. And my Facebook, which I think I kept like open on the side of my work desktop, just kept pinging because people kept sending messages, and it made me feel loved and received in the way that so much about the digital network world has always made me feel, loved and received. Not always made me feel loved and received, but has from the time that I started made me feel loved and received, in addition to sometimes not making me feel that way. But yeah, I am grateful to have had the experience in time that I did. I actually think that we have a responsibility, those of us who've had that experience, to at least hold on to the belief that there will be something next. It doesn't have to be digital. I teach media. I'm a McLuhanist. Every medium has its own deep, dark things that eventually sort of turn over into the next thing. I don't love the time that we're in because I think that our focus on automation encourages us to give away our agency, our voice, our weirdness, our peculiarness. And I think that all of us who can preserve that in any way that we can, not just for ourselves, but very much for the next generations, and say, no, you don't have to live in this anodyne world where you are just the object of consumption, where you just absorb what is put at you. No, that's not a way to live. And whether we do it through older media like zines or digital media, the digital media piece may not be the way that we can continue to go, depending on what we're doing with our data and all of those things, right? Some of those decisions are not entirely in our control, but I don't believe that the human spirit is actually interested in just the boring nothing. And so I want to hold on to some sense that we can all be weird and peculiar in our own little ways.
Wow, what a wonderful moment to end on. Like, I can't wait to have this continuation of this conversation. I hope people watching and listening to this will join us on August 20th. And on the future media question, I'm hoping you will become pen pals and write me postcards because I'm obsessed with stationery. And that's the future I would like to see.
Okay, I will. Note to self. And yes, come out on August 20th and be weird and peculiar with us.
Well, thank you so much, Bonnie. I really, really appreciate chatting with you today. And we look forward to welcoming you to our community of practice. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.